Now, Rob's going to come with some very much practical tips and answers for you before we move on to Rana Romina. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Cash, and thanks, Lisa. And Lisa mentioned at the end there the vetoes course that's sponsored by the BOA that she is running, and this is really a wonderful opportunity if you're delivering training and you haven't got to grips with at many aspects of the curriculum. A great opportunity for you to do that in more detail than tonight. It really is an excellent session that's been rolled out across most of the country now. I mentioned earlier on that some of you will have big gaps in your knowledge and some of you will have smaller gaps. And I'm going to ask a number of questions. I'm going to answer them. And I'm going to start off answering basic questions. And if you think you're au fait with the curriculum, see if you can answer the questions before I tell you what I think the answers are. And I'm going to start by posing the question, what hasn't changed in the curriculum? Well, there's lots that hasn't changed. The syllabus hasn't changed, for one thing. So the knowledge that's required and the clinical and procedural skills that you're required to demonstrate as a trainee are unchanged. And that's why in the new curriculum, it's still hinged around professional knowledge and professional skills. And if the syllabus hasn't changed, that implies that the exam hasn't changed. It will be exactly the same as it was last year, when the exam is sat again in November of this year and throughout next year. The COVID changes will apply, but the changes are nothing to do with the curriculum moving on. And importantly, the competency standards aren't altered. We certainly don't want to drop the standards of achievement. We want to raise them, if anything, but in a slightly different direction that we tried to raise them previously. And we think that we'll achieve that. So what has changed? Well, the outcomes now have become more important than the means of achieving them. And secondly, the method of assessment has changed, in part considerably, but in part in terms, for example, of assessment within WBAs remains unchanged. So when does the new curriculum start? Well, it's August of this year. It's August the 4th of this year, so not long. The first time it'll have an impact on you will, as a trainer and as a trainee, will be when you're agreeing the learning agreements that will happen early in August. So it's not long. But does it apply to everybody from August? Well, it doesn't. It's mandatory for trainees up to ST7. But if you're a trainee at ST8 on the 4th of August of this year, the change is voluntary. And it's also voluntary for any applicant who's not in a training post who wants to enter the specialist register through CSER. But everybody must have moved to the new curriculum by August 2023. So if you're ST8, you've got the option of changing. If you're below ST8, you have to move to the new curriculum. And the reason for the 2-year gap is to accommodate trainees, for example, who are less than full-time. Now, most of the questions, a lot of them that I pose will be directed at any trainers in the audience, and Ran and Romina will address queries that are more likely to be raised by trainees. But if you're a trainee, what is going to be the main change for you? Well, it's going to be the assessment of the trainee using the multiple consultant report. So what's the big deal about the MCR? Well, it offers a more holistic, target-focused, and hopefully accurate assessment that should produce a better day one consultant. But why are there no specific rules about how the MCR process will run? Well, we think that each training unit will use the general principles of the MCR to devise a process that best fits that unit. There'll be no right way and there'll be no wrong way. So is the trainee involved in the MCR? No, but the trainee is involved in the preparation for the MCR, and the clinical supervisor must feed back the outcome of the MCR to the trainee afterwards. How long should a single MCR take? Lisa alluded to this, and we think it'll be about 15 or 20 minutes for the average trainee. But that implies that some preparatory work is done, and I think that this for the clinical supervisor is very important, and you'll learn as time goes on the value of putting some time into the process before it actually takes place. But there will be trainees that you identify areas where they're deficient and need particular help. So you may need to spend 40 or 50 minutes for this type of struggling trainee. So any tips about running a good MCR process? Well, there are 3 that I would pick out, and in our trust, we've run a sort of dummy MCR for the last 6 or 9 months. And the things that we've learned are, firstly, to make sure that you let the appointed clinical supervisor run the process for each trainee. So the lead-in and the running of that process should belong to that one clinical supervisor. Preparation, as I said previously, is absolutely vital, and with a good trainee shouldn't take too long. And I would strongly consider setting aside ring-fence time to assess multiple trainees, not only with multiple clinical supervisors, but also think of inviting other healthcare professionals. They can't input into the process in terms of entering onto ISCP, but they can provide valuable comments. For example, the scrub assistant, who can give an insight into the trainee and the trainee's abilities in theatre when the consultant is in the coffee room, as they quite rightly should be with senior trainees. So why are there so few mandatory courses? This is a question for those of you that are beginning to get a little bit more familiar with the trainee. And this is a question that the SAC dealt with. We were quite keen that more mandatory cases should be allowed. We've only got 1. We were allowed ATLS, and we had to fight quite hard for that. But the reason for this relates to the GMC decision that was based on the principle that it's the outcome and not the means of the achievement of the outcome that's important. And when you consider that that's a principle by which all curricula are based, it does make more sense that there are much fewer mandatory courses than was the case previously. So how do WBAs fit into the new curriculum? Well, some remain, such as the critical condition CBDs. They're unchanged, and there's certainly no change in the level that's required in order to progress. The competency levels are sacrosanct because they're based on safety and competence that's required to be a day 1 consultant. There are no set numbers required to achieve the competencies, but as a guide, most trainees, I think initially, will still need roughly the same number to achieve level 4, although I suspect with time that number may be refined down slightly. Now, if I'm a hand surgeon, let's just say for the sake of argument, the question would be, is there anything special that I need to know? Well, the answer is no, because the knowledge requirements are no different in the new curriculum to the old curriculum, and the skills requirements are no different. The rate of acquisition of knowledge and skills for most trainees will be unchanged, and it will still take around 6 years for the training to be completed. And the reason for this is because the changes in the assessment are generic, they're not specific, and they're not related to any changes in the syllabus. So could I summarize the assessment and feedback process. There are 8 areas that I can identify here. I won't go into them in detail because Lisa's already covered this, but what I will do is highlight in red the 3 areas where there has to be a major degree of trainee involvement, or where the trainee leads the action. And you'll see that the majority of the stages, the trainee doesn't take a lead or isn't involved actively. And I think this reflects a question that is also asked: who is it that the change in the curriculum is going to affect more? Is it the trainee or the trainer? And I think the answer to that is that it's the trainer and not the trainee. And I think that should reassure a lot of the trainees who are under the impression and the apprehension that they are going to have to do a huge lot more with the new curriculum than was the case with the old, and you really don't. But time will tell, and hopefully you'll be reassured by that. So how can you find out more? Well, you can go onto the ISCP homepage. This is growing as the weeks go on, and there are a number of excellent documents there already. And there's another one that's going to be added very soon that focuses on what you actually have to do in your different roles, whether it's TPD, AES, clinical supervisor, or trainee. BOA website has a page dedicated to the curriculum, and I've mentioned the excellent Vetoes program that Lisa's rolling out. There'll be a session at BOA Congress this year, and I can refer you to the JTO published earlier on this month, where we had an article summarizing a lot of what we're discussing tonight. And if you're stuck, ask me. There you go, my email address is out there. I get asked a lot of questions via email anyway, so I'm used to it. I'm happier if you ask me, if you really can't get an answer, because if you can't, it's probably a question that deserves to be publicized to a wider audience. So thank you very much.
Well, that was very brave of you, sharing your email address.